Walter Bramble and the Last Gaslit Street, a Victorian sleep story. Chapter 1. The Bus to Marchbourne. The bus to Marchbourne left at 3:20, which meant that Walter Bramble arrived in the town just as the afternoon was giving up on itself. It was the 3rd week of November. The light had that thin quality it takes on in the weeks before Christmas, when the sun never really climbs, and the whole day feels like a long, slow lean towards evening. Walter did not mind this. He had spent a great many years minding it, and had recently decided to stop. He got down from the bus at the bottom of the hill, in front of a chemist with a window full of hot water bottles, and stood for a moment with his hands in his coat pockets, getting his bearings. Marchbourne was a market town of the sort that had been slightly too small to be improved. The main street ran up a hill, and then thought better of it. There was a church at the top, a corn exchange at the bottom, and between them a run of shop fronts with Victorian upper stories and modern ground floors, so that if you looked above the signs you saw a completely different town from the one you were standing in. Walter had come for the books. There was a second-hand bookshop halfway up, called Petheridge and Son, and twice a year it cleared its stockroom into cardboard boxes on the pavement and sold everything for very little. Walter had heard about it from a man at the library, and had thought about it for 4 days before deciding that a bus fare and an afternoon were not a great deal to risk. The boxes were still out when he arrived, though the light was going and the shop assistant had begun looking at them the way you look at washing when it starts to rain. Walter crouched down and worked through them anyway. He found a book about canal locks, a novel he had read 40 years ago and remembered fondly and inaccurately, and a small green volume on the history of public lighting that he picked up entirely by accident, because it had fallen open at a photograph of a man on a ladder. He took the 3 of them inside. The shop smelled the way those shops always smell, of dry paper and old dust, and something faintly sweet underneath, like the ghost of somebody's pipe. A gas fire burned very low in the corner. The man behind the counter was perhaps 80, with a cardigan buttoned wrongly, and he took the books one at a time and looked at each of them properly before naming a price. He stopped at the green one. "Now that is a coincidence," he said. "Is it? You will have seen the lamps then." Walter admitted that he had not. The old man seemed pleased by this, in the way of a person who has been given permission to tell somebody something. "Prospect Terrace," he said, "off the top of the hill, past the church, on the left. 12 lamps, all gas, all lit by hand." Walter waited. "There is nowhere else in the county," the old man said. "There are gas lamps in London, and there are gas lamps in 1 or 2 other places, but they are on clocks and timers, and they mind themselves. Ours does not. Ours has Arthur." "Arthur?" "Arthur Fenn. He's been doing it since he was 22 years old, and he is now 79, and he goes out every evening at lighting up time with a ladder over his shoulder like the last man in England, which, as far as I can make out, he very nearly is." He put the 3 books into a paper bag and folded the top over twice. "You could walk up," he said, "if you were minded." Walter paid and thanked him, and stepped out into the street. The lamps of the main road had already come on, the tall aluminium ones, and they had that flat orange colour that makes everything underneath look slightly unwell. A car went past. A woman came out of the butcher's and pulled her collar up and went the other way. Walter stood on the pavement with his paper bag and considered the hill. He was, he would have admitted, a little tired. He was 68 years old and had been on his feet in a cold bookshop, and the sensible thing was to walk down to the corn exchange and wait for the 5:20 and be home before the news. But it was a Thursday, and nobody was expecting him, and there was another bus at 7:30. He looked up towards the church tower, which was already dark against a sky the colour of a wet slate roof, and he found that his feet had made the decision some moments before the rest of him. He went up the hill. The hill was steeper than it looked, which is the way of hills in market towns, and he took it slowly, stopping once outside a shoe shop to look at nothing in particular and get his breath back without appearing to. The shops thinned out. The pavement narrowed. He passed the church and the churchyard behind it, where the stones leaned together like people sharing an umbrella. And then, on the left, a low brick wall, a break in the wall, and a street sign that had been painted so many times the letters had gone soft at the edges. Prospect Terrace. Walter turned in. Chapter 2. The First Lamp. The terrace ran away from him and uphill, curving slightly to the right, so that he could not see the far end of it. It was a single row of houses, brick, 3 stories, built at some point in the 1860s by somebody who had believed in front steps and good windows. The doors were all different colours now. There were bicycles in 1 or 2 of the small front gardens, and a wheelie bin, and in a bay window near him a Christmas tree already lit 3 weeks early. On the other side of the road there were no houses at all. There was a wall, and behind the wall the ground fell away, and beyond that the whole of the town lay out in the dusk with its lights just beginning. And along the pavement at intervals stood the lamps. They were cast iron, painted a green so dark it was almost black, fluted at the base with a scrolled collar near the top and a lantern head with 4 glass panes and a little crown of a chimney. They looked, Walter thought, exactly like the illustrations in books, which was a strange thing to think about something standing 3 feet away from him in the actual world. They were not lit. He walked up as far as the first one and stood beside it, and put his hand on the column, and found it cold and slightly rough, where the paint had been laid on over decades and never quite stripped back. There was a sound behind him. It was the sound of a ladder being carried by somebody who has carried a ladder a great many times, which is a particular sound, a sort of soft rhythmic knock as it swings. Walter turned around. The man coming up the pavement was small and square, and moved with a very slight list to the left, as though the ladder had been on that shoulder so long that his body had made an arrangement with it. He wore a donkey jacket and a flat cap, and he had a canvas satchel across his front. He was 79 and looked at a distance about 60 and up close about 90, which is a trick that some men manage. Beside him walked a young woman in a red waterproof. The old man stopped a few feet away and looked at Walter without hostility and without much curiosity either. "Evening," he said. "Good evening," said Walter. "I hope I'm not in the way." "You are, a bit." Walter moved. The young woman grinned at him from under her hood. The old man set the ladder against the lamp column, judged it, moved the foot of it 2 inches to the left and judged it again. Then he opened the satchel and took out a key. It was not a key of the sort that goes into a door. It was a short steel bar with a squared socket at one end, worn bright with handling. "You will be the fellow from the bookshop," he said, without looking round. Walter blinked. "He telephoned," said the young woman. "He does that. He telephones ahead if anybody asks about the lamps. He thinks he is being helpful." "He is being nosy," said the old man. "He is being both," she said. "I am Nell." Walter Bramble. "That is my grandfather. He will not tell you his name for another 10 minutes because he likes to make people wait." "Arthur Fenn," said the old man to the lamp. He went up the ladder. He did it slowly, and he did it the way a man goes up his own stairs in the dark without looking at his feet. At the top he reached into the lantern head, and there was a small metallic sound, and then the click of the key turning in the socket. There was a hiss. It was a soft sound, softer than Walter expected, more like a kettle beginning to think about it than anything else. Then a small blue flame appeared inside the glass, and steadied, and reached, and caught. And the mantle bloomed. That was the only word Walter could find for it, then or afterwards. It did not switch on. It came up the way light comes up on a stage, from nothing to a soft ivory glow over about 2 seconds, and it did not have the flatness of electricity. It moved. It had a very slight tremble at its heart, the way a candle flame has, and it threw a warm circle on the pavement that faded at the edges instead of stopping. Walter stood in the road and looked at it. Arthur came down the ladder. "Well," he said. "Yes," said Walter. "They all say that," said Nell. Chapter 3. The Way It Is Done. 11 more, said Arthur, and picked up the ladder. Walter fell in beside them without being invited, and nobody said anything about it, which he took to be the local arrangement. They walked to the second lamp, which was about 40 paces up the terrace. 40 paces, Walter learned, was the whole logic of the street. The Victorians had spaced their lamps so that the pool of light from one just failed to reach the pool from the next, leaving a stretch of dimness in between, and this had not been an oversight. It had been a decision about money. "Gas cost," said Arthur, setting the ladder. They put them as far apart as they dared. Any further and the corporation would have had letters. He went up. Walter watched more carefully this time. There was a small door in the lantern head, hinged, no bigger than a paperback. Arthur opened it and reached in with the key and turned. Inside, Walter could just make out a little brass tap, and above it the mantle itself, a fragile gauze bag about the size of a plum hanging from its holder. "Is there a pilot?" Walter asked when Arthur came down. "On some of them. Number 3 has one, and number 9, because they are awkward. The rest I light." He took a taper from the satchel. It was a length of waxed cord in a metal holder, and he lit it with an ordinary kitchen lighter, cupping his hand round it, and Walter thought that there was probably something wrong with the fact that the last gaslit street in the county was maintained with a lighter bought in a petrol station, and then thought that there was probably nothing wrong with it at all. They went on. The rhythm of it settled over the 3 of them very quickly. Ladder down, foot placed, 2 rungs, 3, 4, small door open, key in, turn, taper up, hiss, bloom, door closed, down, ladder up onto the shoulder, 40 paces. Behind them the street came on lamp by lamp, and each time a new one lit, the one before it seemed to grow slightly warmer, as though it had been waiting for company. "How many are there in the county?" said Walter at the 4th. "Here? 12. Nowhere else. There were 260 in this town in 1912. They took the last of the others out in 1961, over 3 weeks, and by all accounts nobody said very much about it at the time. But not these. Not these." Arthur was up the ladder. His voice came down flatly without any of the pride Walter might have expected. The main was in the road already for the houses. It would have cost more to dig it out than to leave it, so they left it. And then somebody had to light them, and that was Mr. Pring. And when Mr. Pring got too old for the ladder, it was me. And the town pays for it. The town pays for the gas. It is not very much gas. 12 lamps is less than one house. Nell had been walking a little behind with her hands in her pockets. Now she said, "Tell him about the meeting." Arthur made a noise in his throat. "There was a meeting," said Nell to Walter, "in 1984, where the council voted to take them out and put in sodium lights, and 41 people from this street went and sat in the room and would not leave." 39, said Arthur. 41. 39. Mrs. Ackroyd was outside with the pram, and the bellboy was under the table. "He was there," said Nell, "under the table or not." They walked to the 5th lamp. Below them, on the right-hand side, the town had come fully on now, and Walter could see the shape of it, the orange grid of the newer streets, the white glare of a supermarket car park, and the single-lit clock face of the church at the top of the hill. And on this side, 12 small warm lights, one after another, the colour of the inside of a lampshade. He noticed that he had stopped feeling tired. Chapter 4. The kitchen at number 11. At the 6th lamp, Arthur came down the ladder, looked at the sky, and said, "Tea." It was apparently not a suggestion. Number 11 was 3 doors along, and it had a green door and a boot scraper and a hallway with a barometer in it that had not worked since the 1970s. Arthur leaned the ladder against the wall outside without any evident concern for it. "Nobody's going to take it," said Nell, seeing Walter's face. "It weighs a ton, and everybody knows whose it is." The kitchen was at the back. It was small and warm, and had a gas cooker with a whistling kettle already sitting on it, and a table with a formica top, and a window over the sink looking out at a dark garden with a shed in it. Arthur lit the ring with a match and put the kettle on. Walter sat down where he was pointed to. "2 sugars," said Arthur, not asking. "1. 1 then." The kettle began that long, low note it makes before it makes the other one. Nell took off the red waterproof and hung it on the back of the door, and underneath she was wearing a jumper with a college crest on it, and Walter revised his estimate of her age up by about 3 years. "You are learning it," he said. "I am learning it." "Is that difficult?" "It is not difficult. There is nothing difficult about it. That is the thing everybody gets wrong." She sat down opposite him. "You can teach a person the lamps in one evening. It is going out and doing it every single evening for the rest of your life that is difficult, and nobody can teach you that." From the cooker, Arthur said, "She has 3 months of it." "I have 3 months of it," Nell agreed, and then he stops. Walter looked at the old man's back. "Are you certain?" "Ladder," said Arthur. "He fell in March," said Nell. "I did not fall. I came down faster than I intended. Off the 4th rung of number 9 into the wall and broke 2 ribs, and did not tell anybody for 6 days. Ribs mend." "They do," said Nell. "That is not the argument." The kettle came up to its whistle, and Arthur took it off, and for a while there was nothing but the sounds of tea being made by somebody who has made it in the same kitchen for 50 years, which is to say almost no sound at all. He put the mugs down. He sat. He wrapped both hands round his own, the way old men do. 57 years, he said to the table. "I have lit that street 57 years. I have lit it with a chest infection, and I have lit it the evening my wife died, which people think is a terrible thing, and it was not. It was the only hour of that week I could stand." He turned the mug a quarter turn. "I am not sentimental about it. It is a job. But it is a job that stops if nobody does it, and there is no machine coming, and there is no man in an office who will notice for about 4 years. And Nell will do it. Nell will do it for as long as Nell wants to do it," said Arthur, "and then somebody else will, or nobody will, and I will not be here for that part, so it is not my business." Nell said nothing. She was looking into her tea with the particular flat expression of somebody who has heard a thing said many times and still does not entirely accept it. Walter, who had spent 31 years in front of classrooms and had developed some instinct about when to speak and when not to, drank his tea. Outside, it had started to rain. Chapter 5, Number 7. It was not heavy rain. It was the fine sort that does not seem to be doing anything much until you have been in it for 10 minutes and find you are wet through to the shoulders. They went back out into it, and Arthur took up the ladder, and they carried on up the terrace. Lamp 7 stood outside a house with a for sale sign and a laurel hedge that had got above itself. Arthur stopped in front of it and set the ladder down and said, "This one." "What about it?" "You will see." He went up. Walter, standing below with his collar up and the rain making a fine cold film on his face, watched the small door open and the key go in and the taper go up. There was a hiss. There was no bloom. Arthur waited. He shut off the tap. He waited again, counting under his breath. Then he opened it once more and lifted the taper, and this time the hiss caught, and there was a small flare of yellow that jumped and shrank and went out. "Ah," said Arthur comfortably. "What is it doing?" "Sulking." He came down 2 rungs and looked at the lantern head from a slightly different angle, the way you look at a picture you are hanging. "Number 7 is on the corner of the alley," he said. "There is a draught comes up that alley, off the fields, and it does not care what the wind is doing anywhere else in England. In 1931 they fitted a baffle to it. In 1958 they took the baffle off again because it made the light bad. So—" He shrugged, 4 feet up a ladder in the rain. "So you learn it." "Learn what?" "To turn the tap a quarter and let it fill, and wait a count of 6, and then light it from the far side with your hand across." He did it. The mantle bloomed. Walter laughed out loud and was slightly embarrassed at himself, and looked round to find that Nell was laughing too. "He does that every night," she said. "Every single night for 57 years. Number 7 is a fussy old sod, and he knows exactly how to talk to it. And when I do it wrong, he does not say anything. He just stands there." "I stand there," Arthur agreed, coming down. "He stands there for a very long time." They moved on. Number 8 lit first time. Number 9 had the pilot and needed only the tap. Number 10 had a cracked pane in the lantern head, low down on the left, that had been cracked since a hailstorm in the 1990s and let out a thin blade of brighter light onto the pavement. And Walter noticed that when they reached it, Nell stepped over the blade of light rather than through it, without any apparent thought, the way a person avoids a particular flagstone on the way to their own front door. He decided not to mention it. The rain thickened slightly, and then thought better of it. Under each lamp, as they passed it, the falling drizzle became briefly visible, a fine drifting curtain lit from above, and then invisible again in the dark between. Walter found himself watching for it. Light and rain, and dark. Light and rain, and dark. 40 paces. 40 paces. Chapter 6. The top of the hill. The 12th lamp stood at the very top of Prospect Terrace, where the houses ended and the road turned into a track between two hedges and went off towards a farm. It was the oldest of them. Arthur said so as he set the ladder. 1864. The rest were replaced at various times, but that column has been in that hole for 162 years. There is a foundry mark on the base if you care to look, but you will not read it. The paint has filled it in. Walter looked anyway. He could feel the letters under his thumb, soft as writing under a blanket. Arthur went up. The key, the hiss, the count, the taper, the bloom. And then he came down and folded the ladder against the hedge and said nothing at all. And the three of them turned round and looked back down the street. Walter had been walking up it for the better part of an hour, and he had seen each lamp lit, one at a time, close up. He had not once looked back. The terrace fell away below them in its slow curve, and the 12 lamps ran down it, and because of the curve he could see them all at once, each with its soft circle on the wet pavement, each circle just failing to touch the next, so that the street was a line of warm coins laid on dark cloth. The rain had varnished everything. The brick fronts were shining. The reflections went down into the pavement almost as far as the lamps went up, and beyond and below, the whole electric town, orange and white and cold, going about its evening. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Nell said quietly, "That is the bit." "Yes," said Walter, "that is the bit I did not know about. I have lived here since I was 11. I have walked down that street about 9,000 times, and I never once stood at the top and looked at it, because it is always already on. You only get this if you are the one who does it." Arthur had his hands in his pockets. "Mr. Pring told me that," he said. 1969. He said you will get bored of the ladder, and you will get bored of the rain, and you will never once get bored of turning round. Was he right? He was right. A pause. He was wrong about the rain. I got very bored of the rain. Walter laughed. Somewhere below them, a door opened and closed. A dog barked twice and stopped. In the bay window near the bottom of the street, the Christmas tree was still going, and its small coloured lights looked, from up here, like something quite far away and long ago. "May I ask you something?" said Walter. "You may." "When you stop, in 3 months, will you come out and watch her do it?" Arthur did not answer for long enough that Walter thought he might have got it wrong. Then he said, "No." "No? No, because if I am standing at the bottom of that street with my hands in my pockets, she is not lighting the lamps. She is being watched lighting the lamps, and those are 2 different jobs, and only one of them is any good." He shifted his weight. "I will be in the kitchen, and she will come in at the end and tell me number 7 was a swine, and I will say it always was, and that will be the whole of it." Nell was looking very hard at the town. "Right," said Arthur. "Bus." Chapter 7. The 20 past 7. They walked down together, and it was different going down, because the work was finished and the lamps were behind them and around them and ahead of them all at once. Walter went slowly. Nobody hurried him. Under each lamp there was that moment of walking into the warmth of it, when his shadow shortened and swung round behind him, and then lengthened out again in front as he came through and left it. And after 12 of those he found that his shoulders had come down from wherever they usually sat. At the bottom, by the low brick wall and the soft-edged street sign, they stopped. "Well," said Arthur. "Thank you," said Walter. "That was not what I came for." "Nothing ever is." Nell put out her hand and Walter shook it. "If you come back," she said, "come back in February. It is dark by 4. You get the whole round in the proper dark, and there is usually ice on the ladder, and it is completely miserable, and you will like it much better." "That is quite a sales pitch." "It is an honest one." Arthur picked up the ladder, settled it on the left shoulder, and put his hand up once without turning round, and the two of them went off along the terrace towards the green door of number 11, and the ladder swung and made its soft knocking sound and got quieter. Walter went down the hill. The wind had dropped. The rain had stopped altogether and left the pavements shining. Petheridge and Son was dark now, with the boxes taken in. The chemist's window still had its hot water bottles. The bus came at 7:20, 3 minutes late, with 4 people on it and the heater going hard. Walter sat near the middle on the left, with his paper bag of books on his knee, and the windows steamed up almost at once. He wiped a patch clear with the side of his hand. As the bus came round the long bend at the edge of the town, the hill turned itself towards him, and for perhaps 6 seconds he could see it. Not the town, which was only lights. The one line of small, warm lamps along the dark side of the hill, curving up, ending. Then a hedge came across, and it was gone. Walter sat back. He thought about the taper and the little brass tap. He thought about a draught that comes up an alley off the fields and does not care what the wind is doing anywhere else in England, and about a man who has known that for 57 years and never written it down, and a young woman who has 3 months to learn it. He thought about an old man in a kitchen, deliberately not watching. The heater breathed. The windows fogged over again, and he let them. By the time the bus reached his own stop, Walter Bramble was extremely close to asleep, and had to be nudged awake by the driver, who was kind about it, and who said that it happened all the time on the last one. Walter walked home under the ordinary orange lamps that had come on by themselves, and would go off by themselves, and he did not mind them at all, and he was in bed by 9:30. He slept that night very well indeed. The end.